The moment he knelt in the confessional, I should have called the police. Through the carved wooden lattice, the scent of blood seeped in before his voice did, and it wasn't his own blood. I was a priest. I was supposed to be detached from the secular world, strictly abiding by my vows. Yet, driven by some inexplicable force, I stood up, walked to the main doors of the church, and dropped the heavy iron latch. God was watching me, but I locked his doors. St. Mark's Church was built in the oldest district of the city. The stones were 200 years old, the bell a century old, and I was the sole priest here. My name is Elijah. People only knew my first name. They didn't know where I came from, and no one asked. A priest isn't supposed to have a past, just as a candle shouldn't remember that it was once a block of wood. It was a Thursday, just past midnight. The rain was pouring so hard it felt like it was trying to drown the entire city. I should have been asleep, but I couldn't. I had been suffering from insomnia lately, feeling an incessant, restless itch deep in my bones. Only later did I realize it was the onset of my heat. My body's way of reminding me that I was not just a priest, I was an Omega. I got up, draped my black cassock over my shoulders, and headed into the sanctuary to light a candle and find some peace. That was when the side door was pushed open. A tall man walked in. I couldn't make out his face, only a rain-drenched black silhouette stepping steadily from the entrance toward the confessional. His steps were too steady for someone who had just been through an ordeal. He pulled back the curtain and knelt inside. From the other side of the wooden lattice came the sound of his low, measured breathing. "Father," he said, his voice like dark velvet rubbed against sandpaper, "I wish to confess." "The Lord is listening," I sat down and replied out of habit. "Speak, my child." He let out a soft chuckle. There wasn't a trace of repentance in that sound. "Tonight," he said, "I killed 3 men. I should have been shocked, but I wasn't, because the exact moment those words left his mouth, a wave of pheromones flooded the cramped confessional without warning. It was the oppressive, suffocating scent of rust and tobacco, an aura that belonged exclusively to a top-tier alpha. It was so thick, it felt like it could ignite the very air in the room. My breath hitched. I had strictly kept my vows for 20 years and had never lost my composure in front of anyone. The peers from my seminary days had all gone on to marry and have children. I was the only one who had reduced my existence to a cold, burnt-out candle. Yet this man, with a single sentence and a wisp of his pheromones, cracked my 20 years of discipline. "You're not afraid?" he asked through the lattice, sensing something. Most people would have run the moment they heard that. "This is the house of God," I said, suppressing the tremor in my throat. "I cannot run." "Oh?" His voice pressed closer to the wooden screen. "Then why did you lock the main doors?" My blood ran cold. He had seen it. When he came in, he watched me walk over and drop the latch. "Because it is raining outside," I heard myself say. I didn't want the rain blowing in. A pathetic lie. There was a few seconds of silence on the other side of the lattice, and then he laughed again, lower and deeper this time. "Father," he whispered, "when you lie, your pheromones change their scent." I abruptly stood up. An Omega's pheromones leak during emotional fluctuations. It's a genetic vulnerability I cannot control. I had always used the strongest suppressants to suppress it entirely, disguising myself as a transcendent cleric whose very gender was ambiguous. But he smelled it. This man who had just killed 3 people knelt in God's confessional and sniffed out the secret I had hidden for 20 years. "You're an Omega." He stood up and pulled back the curtain. The dim candlelight illuminated his face for the first time. I should have thought he looked fierce, but my first reaction was that he was devastatingly handsome. It was a dangerous kind of beauty, like a freshly sharpened blade. He had high brow bones, deep gray-blue eyes, and a jawline so tense he looked ready to bite. Drenched in rain, his black shirt clung to his body. His collar was open, revealing a fresh, unhealed scar just below his collarbone. He was a head taller than me, looking down at me from above. "And you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I took a half-step back until my shoulders hit the cold stone wall, "are a murderer." "I am." He didn't deny it, stepping closer. "My name is Victor. Half of the underground in this city belongs to me. The 3 who died tonight were trying to take my life." He stopped right in front of me, so close I could smell the mixture of rain and blood on him. "Father," he lowered his head, his voice as light as a sigh, "you have 2 choices now. Report me to the police, or..." His gaze dropped to my chest, which was heaving slightly from tension. "Absolve me." I chose a third option. I stepped sideways away from the wall, walked over to the candle stand, and turned my back to him, my knuckles turning white from gripping the edge of the table. "God forgives any sinner who truly repents," I said. "But you are not repenting. You didn't come here seeking absolution. You came to show off." Silence fell behind me. Then I heard his approaching footsteps. "You're right." His breath ghosted over the back of my neck, right over the fragile location of an omega's scent gland. I didn't come to confess. "I came to see," he murmured, his voice dropping incredibly low, "if the legendary priest, who is as cold as stone, truly has no warmth to him at all." I froze. Now I know. He took a half step back, and I almost instantly missed the warmth of his proximity. A thought that immediately made me feel sick with myself. "You aren't a stone. You just buried your fire very deep." "Get out," I said, my voice finally trembling. "Mr. Victor, please, get out." "All right," surprisingly. He actually turned around. "But I will be back, Father." At the door, he looked back over his shoulder. "After all," he smiled, "I still have a lot of sins to confess." I fell ill for 3 days after that night. It wasn't a normal sickness. It was the biological chaos of a heat triggered by force. The efficacy of my suppressants had been completely shattered by his pheromones. I lay in the cold bed of the priest's quarters with a low-grade fever, my mind completely consumed by those gray-blue eyes. I hated myself. I knelt before the altar for an entire night until my knees went numb. But no matter how hard I prayed, the scent of that man felt like it had been nailed into my bones. I couldn't pull it out. "Lord," I pressed my forehead against the freezing stone floor, "make me forget him." God did not answer. God never answers. On the 7th day, he returned. This time it was at dusk. There were still a few old ladies praying in the pews. He swaggered in and sat in the very last row, remaining perfectly quiet, like a true believer. I was giving a sermon, and my voice nearly broke. After the old ladies eventually left, we were the only 2 left in the massive sanctuary. The setting sun poured through the stained glass, casting a kaleidoscope of colors over him. He stood up and walked to the front row, right before me. "Father," he said, "today I want to make a proper confession. Speak." I gripped the Bible tightly in my hands. "For the past 7 days, he looked at me, his gray-blue eyes burning with something I couldn't decipher. I dreamed of someone every single night. I dreamed of him kneeling before me, wearing a black cassock, his neck so incredibly white." My hand twitched. The Bible nearly fell to the floor. "It is the sin of coveting." He stood up, and took a step onto the dais. "Father, how are you going to punish me? To covet what one should not covet," I stepped back, "is a grave sin." "I know," he advanced. "You should pray. You should fast. You should distance yourself from the source of your temptation." I tried. He stopped right in front of me. For 7 days, I locked myself in my room and did nothing but try to quit it. And the result? The result is, he raised his hand, his fingertips lightly brushing a stray lock of hair by my ear. I can't. I jerked my head away as if I had been burned. "You are an alpha," I was almost begging him. "There are plenty of omegas in this city, young, beautiful, unburdened by vows. Why does it have to be me?" "Because," he withdrew his hand, his gaze darkening, "you are the only one who didn't run away when I told you I killed someone." "You locked the door, Elijah." It was the first time he used my name. "In that moment, you weren't a priest. You were a man willing to lock the door for me. I've never had anyone do that for me before. I should have refuted him. I should have told him that I didn't lock the door for him, but to prevent anyone else from stumbling in and seeing the bloodshed, to protect the church's reputation, but I couldn't utter a single syllable. Because he was right. That night, when I dropped the latch, I wasn't thinking about God or the church. I was thinking about this stranger covered in blood who made my heart race out of control. I betrayed my faith the second that iron latch fell into place. "Victor," I closed my eyes, "you are dragging me down to hell." "No," his voice was soft. "I'm pulling you back to the human world." "The altar is too cold, Father." He took a step back and turned to leave. "Come down. I'll be waiting for you at the bottom." For the next month, he came every week. Sometimes he sat in the confessional, sometimes in the back row of the pews. He never crossed the line after touching my hair that one time. He never laid a hand on me again. He simply came, sat, listened to my sermons, and when the church emptied out, he would talk to me. He told me about his world. It was a world I couldn't even begin to fathom. Guns, blood, betrayal, power, and an endless, unquenchable thirst for vengeance. He lost his parents at 8, started fighting in the streets at 12, and crawled his way to his current position over a mountain of corpses. "Are you not afraid?" I asked him once. "Having so many lives on your hands?" "I am." He was uncharacteristically honest. "Every night I am afraid. Afraid that if I close my eyes, I'll never wake up. Afraid that the person I trust most will stab me in the back the next second. That's why I come here." He looked at me. "This is the only place I feel safe. Because it is God's house?" "No," he shook his head. "Because you are here." I started praying for him. Not as a priest praying for a sinner, but as Elijah praying for Victor. I begged God to keep him safe. I asked him to make those who pointed guns at him lower their weapons. I prayed that this scarred, battered man might find just one night of peaceful sleep. This in itself was blasphemy. A priest should not harbor such profound personal feelings for anyone. A priest's love is supposed to be equal, detached, and spread universally among the masses. Yet all my love had tipped entirely toward a murderer. I knew I was falling, but I didn't want to grab onto anything to stop myself. The night it happened, it was raining, the exact same torrential downpour as the first night he came. I was just about to lock the doors when he stumbled in. This time, the blood was his own. He had taken a bullet to the left shoulder. His black shirt was soaked through, and his face was as pale as paper, yet he was still smiling. "Father, I've come to confess again." "Shut up!" I yelled at him for the first time. frantically rushing over to support his weight. "You need a doctor!" "Can't go to the hospital." He grabbed my wrist with terrifying strength. "They're watching all of them." "Do you have medicine here?" I dragged him into my quarters and dug out the church's first aid kit. I wasn't a doctor, but a priest often had to tend to the injured, so I knew the basics. The bullet was lodged in his shoulder blade. Gritting my teeth, I used a sterilized forceps to painfully extract it, inch by inch. He didn't let out a single groan the entire time. He just stared at me, his gray-blue eyes glowing terrifyingly bright in the candlelight. "Elijah," he suddenly said, "if I die here tonight..." "You are not going to die," I cut him off, my hands shaking. "If I die," he stubbornly continued, "I want you to know these past 3 months have been the most human I've ever felt in my entire life." By the time I finished suturing his wound, the sky was beginning to lighten. He was leaning against the headboard of my bed, color slowly returning to his face. The overpowering stench of blood and his pheromones tangled in the cramped room. I fed him fever reducers and slumped onto the floor by the bed, completely drained of strength. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You almost died." I buried my face in my knees, my voice muffled. "You almost died in my church. Wouldn't that be a good thing?" he asked. "At least I'd die in the place closest to God." "It's not good." I looked up, my eyes red. "It's not good at all." He froze. I had never shown this kind of emotion in front of him. A priest's face was supposed to be forever aloof, restrained a blurry silhouette behind a wooden screen. But at that moment, I couldn't hide anything anymore. "If you die," I heard my own voice shatter, "what am I supposed to do?" He reached out with his uninjured arm and gently cupped my face. This time, I didn't pull away. "Elijah," his thumb brushed the corner of my eye. "Look at me." I looked at him. "I won't die." He enunciated every word. "I promise you, until I pull you down from that altar, I absolutely will not die. While I am alive, I want you to be mine." I should have pushed him away. 1,000 voices screamed in my head, telling me this was a sin, blasphemy, a path of eternal damnation. But my body honestly, slowly, leaned toward him. Outside the window, the first ray of dawn broke through, illuminating the face of the holy statue. With my back turned to God, I kissed the lips of a murderer. It was a very light, fleeting kiss. So short it felt like an illusion. I practically recoiled the next second, trembling all over, covering my mouth with the back of my hand as if that could erase what had just happened. "I can't." I shook my head, tears finally falling. "Victor, I can't. This is my vow, my faith. I've given my entire life to God." "I know." He didn't press me, merely watching me quietly. "I won't force you, but Elijah," his voice was soft, "you kissed me just now. You initiated it." I couldn't speak. "You can keep pretending you're a stone," he said, "but we both know you're not." He stayed at the church for a week. Until his wound healed, he couldn't leave. I hid him in my quarters. During the day, I held mass, preached, and listened to confessions as usual. At night, I returned to care for him. Those were the most agonizingly conflicted 7 days of my life. By day, I was Father Elijah of St. Mark's, cold, respectable, a saint in the eyes of the public who never showed favoritism and never harbored mortal desires. By night, I sat by the bedside of an underworld boss, changing his dressings, listening to his bloody, exhausted past, and staring at his sleeping face as my heart churned violently. I was living as 2 different people, one on the altar, one in the mortal realm, and both of them had fallen in love with the same forbidden man. "Why did you become a priest?" he asked me one night. I was silent for a long time. It was a past I had never spoken of to anyone. "I wasn't an orphan," I finally said. "But when I was 8, my parents died in a fire. The church took me in. There was a priest, I called him, old Elijah. He raised me, sent me to the seminary, taught me how to read, how to pray, and how to believe in God. He was my only family in this world." "What happened to him?" Victor asked. "He died," my voice dropped. 10 years ago, in an accident. The church caught fire, and he couldn't get out." "An accident?" Victor sharply caught my tone. I looked at him, and suddenly felt that in front of this man who had killed and witnessed countless conspiracies, there was no need to hide anything anymore. "I always felt it wasn't an accident," I said. "The day before the fire, he told me he found something unclean within the church. Discrepancies in the ledgers, shady transactions. He said he was going to report it. The very next day, the church burned down." Victor's eyes darkened. "Did you look into it?" "How could I?" I smiled bitterly. "I am just a priest, and they are the entire diocese." When Victor's wound finally healed, he stood at the doors of the church and looked back at me before leaving. "Elijah," he said. "Leave old Elijah's matter to me." "What?" "I have my ways." A cold glint flashed in his gray-blue eyes. "Investigating a fire from 10 years ago isn't difficult for me. You don't need to." "I want to do something for you," he interrupted. "You've done too much for me these past 3 months. It's my turn." He walked away, disappearing into the early morning streets. I stood at the door watching his retreating figure, feeling for the first time an overwhelming, weightless emptiness over someone's departure. I knew I was doomed. I had thoroughly, hopelessly plunged headfirst into this sin. In the days that followed, Victor visited less frequently, but every time he did, he brought a new piece of information regarding the fire. The clues slowly pieced together. The fire 10 years ago was indeed no accident. Someone tampered with the church's basement, blocked the fire escapes, and set it ablaze. The arsonist received a massive payout. The money came from a secret account belonging to the church. Victor placed a stack of documents in front of me. Only a few high-ranking officials have access to it. My hands shook. "Who was it?" "I haven't traced it to the very top yet," he said. "But I'm close. Give me a little more time." I looked at the papers, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt the tangible possibility of revenge. "Victor," I looked up. "Thank you. Don't thank me." He held my gaze. "When all of this is over, you owe me an answer." "What answer? Will you," he spoke deliberately, word by word, "be willing to step down from the altar for me?" For a while, I almost believed we could have an ending that wasn't a total tragedy. Victor investigated, and I waited. The thin veil between us wasn't fully torn, but we hadn't retreated to our original boundaries either. We stood on the edge of a cliff. Neither took a step forward, but neither stepped back. I still held Mass, preached, and prayed every day, but I stopped lying to myself. I knew I loved him. The realization brought me pain, but also peace. At least I was no longer pretending to be a stone. The breaking point arrived on a Sunday. The church was packed for the service. Halfway through the ceremony, the heavy doors were pushed open, and a group of men walked in. Leading them was the bishop. Bishop Herman was the highest-ranking clergyman in our diocese, highly respected and rumored to be next in line for promotion. With a benevolent face, he walked up to me and smiled. "Father Elijah, I've heard a lot about you." Your Grace, I bowed, but an inexplicable chill crept up my spine. I heard that recently. He lowered his voice, his smile failing to reach his eyes. You've been looking into things you shouldn't be looking into. My blood ran cold. I don't know what you're talking about, Your Grace. You don't know? Herman drawled slowly. A fire 10 years ago. A priest named Old Elijah. You don't know about any of this? I stared at him. In that fraction of a second, all the clues clicked into place. Victor had said only a few high-ranking officials could access the secret account, and the man standing before me was the highest-ranking official in the diocese. It was you. I squeezed the words through gritted teeth. You killed Old Elijah. The smile vanished from Herman's face. He stuck his nose where it didn't belong, he said coldly. Just like you are doing right now. Father Elijah, he took a step back as the men behind him stepped forward, circling me. You are a smart man. Unfortunately, you are too smart. As you know, he turned and began walking out, tossing his final words over his shoulder. Smart priests rarely live long. That very night, the church caught fire again. Exactly like it did 10 years ago. I was trapped inside the burning sanctuary, thick smoke filling my lungs until I could barely open my eyes. The escape doors were locked from the outside, just like they had been for Old Elijah. They planned to eliminate me, another thorn in their side, using the exact same method. I knelt before the altar as flames roared around me. I thought I was going to die. I thought I would never see those gray-blue eyes again. Victor, I called out in my heart, I'm sorry. I never got the chance to give you my answer. Just as I was about to lose consciousness, the heavy doors of the church were violently smashed open from the outside. A tall figure, gilded by the firelight, charged in. Elijah! It was him. Victor plunged into the sea of fire, threw me over his shoulder without a second word, covered my nose and mouth with his coat, and battered his way through the burning beams, carrying me out of hell. We tumbled into the rain-soaked courtyard outside. He was covered in wounds, the smell of singed flesh radiating from his skin. But the first thing he did was cup my face, frantically checking if I was okay. You're all right, he muttered, his voice trembling. As long as you're all right. How did you? I coughed, unable to finish my sentence. I've had my men watching you all along. He pulled me into a bone-crushing embrace. I knew they wouldn't let you go. Behind us, St. Mark's Church burned violently. 200 years of stone crumbling inch by inch into the flames. Victor. I leaned against his chest, watching the burning church, tears mixing with the rain on my face. It was Bishop Herman. 10 years ago, it was him too. I know, his voice was ice cold. I found the final missing link tonight. It was him. He was here today. I grabbed his shirt. He admitted it himself. Victor looked down at me. In his gray-blue eyes was a hellish, murderous intent I had never seen before. Elijah, he said, close your eyes. What? What happens next? He shielded me behind his back and stood up. You shouldn't see. From every direction of the street, I saw countless dark silhouettes converging toward us. It was Victor's men, his entire syndicate. He was showing his entire hand. For me, that night, the underworld of the city was completely overturned. I didn't know the exact details. Victor sent me to a safe house with guards and disappeared into the night with his men. I didn't sleep a wink. I knelt in the unfamiliar room and prayed no. I didn't even know who to pray to anymore. My church was burned to ashes. My faith had crumbled the exact second Bishop Herman confessed his sins. The God I believed in had allowed the murderer of my Savior and my own would-be executioner to hide within his church. What was my 20 years of devotion worth? Right before dawn, Victor returned. He stood at the door, completely drenched in blood, looking at me. "It's over," he said. "Where is Herman?" I asked. "He will pay for everything he has done." Victor walked in. "I got all the evidence. The fire from 10 years ago, the black money in the church's ledgers, and the proof that he sent men to burn you alive tonight. I handed all of it over to the clean faction of the church and the police. He won't be able to run." I stared at him, suddenly devoid of words. This man, a murderer, a mob boss, a sinner I should have reported to the authorities, had done for me what God himself had refused to do. God let my Savior suffer an unavenged death for 10 years. Victor gave him justice in a single night. "Elijah." Victor dropped to one knee before me, just like he had when he first knelt in the confessional so long ago. But this time, he wasn't here to confess. "I know I'm not worthy of you," he said. "I have too much blood on my hands. I am a sinner, someone even God would spit on. But I love you. From the moment you locked that door for me, I fell in love with you." I looked at him, tears blurring my vision. "Your church is gone," he continued. "Your faith is broken. I know you have nothing left. So," he looked up, his gray blue eyes brimming with an emotion I could finally read perfectly. "Let me be your new home. Step down from the altar, Elijah. Come to me." I knelt down so we were at eye level. 20 years of vows and discipline turned to ash in that very second. "Victor," I said, my voice trembling but firmer than it had ever been in my life. "I stepped down a long time ago. The moment I locked that door for you, I was already no longer a priest." I cupped his scarred, blood-stained face, as if holding the most precious treasure in the world. "The God I prayed to never answered me," I whispered. "But you responded to every single one of my calls. So from today onward," I pressed my lips to his. This time, there was no pulling back, no trembling, just the sheer, overwhelming release of a floodgate opening after 20 years. I am no longer praying to heaven. I only want you. Outside the window, the sun was rising. A new day washed over two sinners, and we were cleaner than we had ever been. I had never stepped foot in a church in my entire life. In my world, God was a joke. When I killed, there was no God. When I was betrayed, there was no God. When my parents died right in front of my eyes when I was 8, there was no God. So that night, after killing 3 men who wanted my life, I wandered into St. Mark's Church, driven by some inexplicable impulse. I didn't even know why I did it. Maybe I just wanted a place to let the stench of blood dissipate. And then I smelled him. It was the purest pheromone I had ever smelled in my life, like snow, like holy water, like the scent of all the beautiful things I had never been allowed to possess. It was violently suppressed, buried under layers and layers of suppressants, but I still caught it. I knelt in the confessional, looking at the blurry silhouette through the wooden lattice, and suddenly felt an urge to tease him. Tonight, I killed 3 men. I thought he would run. Everyone ran when they heard those words. But he didn't. Instead, he walked over and locked the heavy iron doors of the church. In that moment, this heart of mine, that had been marinating in blood for 30 years, suddenly went mad. I looked into his background. Father Elijah, the sole priest of St. Mark's Church, cold, aloof, unapproachable. The entire city called him a saint, claiming his heart held only God and not a shred of mortal desire. But I knew that was a lie, because he locked the door for me. A saint wouldn't lock the door for a murderer. Only a man whose mortal heart had been moved would do that. I started going to the church over and over again. I told myself I was just curious, just wanting to see if this stone could be warmed up. But eventually, I realized the one being warmed was me. I had never been safe a day in my life. I never had a single moment where I could truly drop my guard and close my eyes. Only in his church, only while listening to him preach doctrines I didn't even believe in, could I finally catch my breath. I knew he was struggling. I could see the terror in his eyes every time he leaned toward me, and the agony every time he pulled away. He had nailed himself to that altar for 20 years. He had long forgotten how to step down. Sometimes I hated his God. I hated that he had monopolized Elijah for 20 years. I hated that he forced such a wonderful person to reduce himself to a burnt-out frozen candle. So I swore I would pull him down. Inch by inch, I would drag him from that freezing heaven back into the mortal world where I lived, even if it was blasphemy, even if it dragged both of us straight to hell. Investigating old Elijah's case was actually quite simple. Looking into a 10-year-old fire required less than a tenth of my usual resources. What was difficult was figuring out how to tell him that the murderer was Bishop Herman. I knew that the moment I did, his faith would shatter. The church he had believed in for 20 years murdered his only family and wanted to burn him alive too. I couldn't bear to do it, but I couldn't hide it from him either. He deserved the truth. He deserved to seek justice for old Elijah, even if the price was the collapse of his entire world. Because I would be there in the ruins to catch him. When the church caught fire that day, I was on the other side of the city. The second I got the news, I felt true, paralyzing terror for the first time in my life. I ran 17 red lights. All I could think on the way was, no, it can't be him. God can take anyone else in the world, just not him. When I charged into the sea of fire, I saw him kneeling before the statue, flames rising all around him. He was so quiet it looked like he had accepted his fate. I went completely insane. I threw him over my shoulder, smashed through the burning beams, and dragged him out of that inferno. When we rolled into the rain, and I felt that he was still breathing, I, a man who never shed a tear in his life, cried. That night, I unleashed the full force of the syndicate I had spent half my life building. I knew exactly what it meant. Once I exposed all my power, there would be no turning back. Every rival would know my hand, and every enemy would smell the blood and pounce. But I didn't care. Herman wanted to use the entire church to crush him, so I would use my entire world to protect him. I flattened every single one of Herman's strongholds, seized all the evidence of his crimes, and nailed that hypocritical bishop and 10 years of his filth to the wall, out in the glaring sunlight. I made the man who stood at the pulpit teaching people to be good taste what hell was really like. For Elijah, and for the old priest I had never met, who had raised my Elijah. Now, he sleeps beside me. He no longer wears black cassocks, no longer recites scripture, no longer prays to a God who never answered. He sleeps deeply, his brow relaxed, looking as though for the first time in 20 years, he can finally rest. I often wake up in the middle of the night just to watch him, to watch the man I pulled down from the altar, to watch the man I traded my entire world for. I have committed countless evils in my life. The blood on my hands can never be washed clean, and I will almost certainly go to hell when I die. But I don't regret a single thing, because before I go to hell, I had him. He still has nightmares, occasionally dreaming of the fire, dreaming of old Elijah. Whenever that happens, I pull him into my arms and gently pat his back, just like he did when he tended to my bullet wound. "It's over," I whisper in his ear. "I'm here." He slowly calms down, curling into my chest, and softly calls my name. "Victor, I'm here. Can we really do this?" he asks sometimes, uncertainty lacing his voice. "A priest and a—" "We can," I interrupt him. "Elijah, we are already together. No man, no God in this world can ever take you away from me. Believe me." Later, I found him a new place. "Not a church," he said. He never wanted to step foot in a church again. It was a small house by the sea. He liked it there. He liked watching the ocean in the early morning, reading books in the sunlight, doing ordinary things he never had the time to do before. He is no longer a priest. He is just Elijah, an ordinary, living, breathing person who laughs, cries, worries about me, and scolds me with red eyes whenever I get hurt. A real, living human being. One day, he suddenly asked me, "Do you still remember the night you first walked into the church?" "Of course I do," I said. "You locked the door for me." "I keep thinking," he leaned his head on my shoulder, looking out at the sea, "if that night I had followed the rules and called the police, then you would have stayed a freezing stone forever." I kissed the top of his head, "kneeling all alone on a cold altar for the rest of your life." And I pulled him tighter. I would never have known that there was actually something in this world worth protecting with my life. He looked up at me and smiled. That smile was brighter than any stained glass window in any cathedral. "Victor," he said, "thank you for pulling me down from heaven." "No," I looked into his eyes and said earnestly, "thank you for locking that door for me." The waves crashed against the reefs. The sunlight fell over two sinners. We had turned our backs on heaven, yet we had never been closer to salvation.